All right, we got a great episode coming up for you today. I'm back. What else could you need? But also a back-to-back for the Brooklyn Nets from Friday into Saturday. Doug Norrie has significant takeaways from two sort of ugly, sloppy games for the Brooklyn Nets, and we'll dive into the play of the supporting cast, what Kevin Durant needs or does not need to do, and then ultimately the state of James Harden's game, Doug, and why this could be a lingering issue that he needs to work through.
Oh, and multiple Ferris Bueller references from Adam, too. So it's all packed into this podcast. We're going to get into the whole kit and caboodle here. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am the returning man, myth, and legend at Adam Armbrecht over on Twitter, covering New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. That is blue checkmark at Doug Norrie, giving you all your daily fantasy breakdowns at DFSR. That's got you for DraftKings. He's got you for FanDuel. If you need your daily projections, Doug Norrie's the guy for you. And of course, we let you know that today's episode is proudly brought to you by PrizePicks. Check out prizepicks.com and use promo code NBA or go to your app and download the app today. PrizePicks is the daily fantasy made easy. And thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We appreciate it. Free for you on all those great platforms. Doug, feel free to take a moment at the top here before we get into the back-to-back from Friday night into Saturday with the Timberwolves and the Chicago Bulls, what we have as far as takeaways from that games and concerns going forward. But feel free just to kind of soak in the glow of having me back here with you.
Oh, it's amazing. Good to have you back, buddy. No, it's always better to do. I mean, look, I absolutely crushed the solo podcast. So no total A pluses across the board.
No doubt there.
A plus, 3 in a row. No big deal there. But in terms of just enjoyment, it's always better to just, the give and take, because when you start talking, I can zone out for half the time. And then what you realize when you do the solo podcast is you have to pay attention the whole time. And that's just 50% more paying attention. No, I'm just kidding. It's good to have you back. I'm glad. I'm happy to. This is actually a good time. I'm glad actually that the timing worked out in this way, because I think after this weekend's games, there's takeaways that probably, I'm not even sure we're going to totally agree on all this, because well, I don't know. What do you want to? Let's get into these games, right? Like, so
Yeah,
because they're coming off the back-to-back, and it's for me, I'm like, oh, it's not all great here.
No, go back to Friday night. They take on the Timberwolves. They get the win. They lose for the second time now this season to the Chicago Bulls on Saturday night, and what some fans look at as kind of a benchmark game because of where Chicago is in the standings and how the Nets have performed against some of the top teams across the NBA. But each game presented, I think, different sample sizes as far as areas that are concerning and maybe just don't have simple solves or aren't just going to sort themselves out. The Minnesota game, just to touch on it quickly, as far as the matchup that you get into, ugly is one way to look at it. Both teams just begging to throw the ball off one another at times. 32 right combined turnovers in that game. It was a mess. And when you look at Minnesota, they're not a contending team. They're a young team, but it's one of the things that I think about when you look at championship caliber versus rebuilding or young, whatever. When you're a young team, you get to just kind of stockpile what the NBA likes right now. And that's length, size, a little bit of strength. And the Timberwolves have a bunch of those bodies. And you start throwing them at the Nets. And the fact that they were able to frustrate them was frustrating, for lack of right. It was annoying that the Minnesota Timberwolves were a problem for the Brooklyn Nets. And I think that that's become a little bit of a theme in some of these games.
And they kind of gave a little playbook for, I think, what the Bulls did too. And that's why some of these two games are kind of connected in some ways, is that they gave a little bit of the playbook of defensively what you can do against the Nets, even if you're undermanned, about how to maybe frustrate them, which is to just basically dare everybody except for Kevin Durant and James Harden to shoot, right? Like, and that is kind of what we saw over these last two games. And I get that they won the game against Minnesota. They beat Minnesota by they beat them by 5, but Minnesota was playing without their best player, Karl Anthony Towns, right? Like, so I don't. It's hard to hang your hat on that win, especially like you said, how freaking ugly it was. It was just an absolute turnover fest. I think there was one point where it was like 4 straight turnovers. Like they just went, it was turnover, or something like that. And it was just like, looked like the Keystone Cops. But I think the Minnesota showed a little bit, like I said, and what Chicago brought out in too is say, hey, look, we're just not worried about any of the other players on this team. Like, and we can start taking that tack. We can start taking that tack now in these regular season games, and it's really going to frustrate the Nets. And I think that was kind of the theme of these two games, was like a frustration around everything was just a little harder than it needed to be because other teams just aren't going to respect the shooting of basically any other guy. And then, like, they're going to moderately respect Patty Mills, and that's going to kind of be it.
Yeah.
And we could be in for the long haul here on some of this stuff, especially when other teams with even better defensive personnel start employing this, because it could really continue to look like sometimes stagnated in offense.
It's one of those interesting things we were talking about, and we'll continue to talk about very positively. Paul Millsap. You'll get to that. There's a whole thing there. LaMarcus Aldridge and the game,
Right.
and where his game is and what he's brought to this team. But, go back to last year when we thought about how Kevin Durant, right, loves to get into that mid-range game. And normally you say in today's NBA, well, you'd rather be taking 3-pointers unless you're hitting it at such a high percentage. That went same for Kyrie as well. He liked to get into that mid-range game. The problem is now in this season, and you said you're going to respect a little bit of what Patty Mills can do. You're going to be concerned about that. But the reason why you're not overall concerned is because there's no Joe Harris there now to continue to fill that out. There aren't other perimeter shooters. There's no Kyrie Irving. So it's just, to me, it ends up being a lot of these teams taking on the Nets look at it as a numbers game, right? I'm not going to sit here and say what's the best way to frustrate Kevin Durant. Who cares? Let him get his 30 to 40 points. That's fine, right? Let Patty Mills get his 15 to 20. That's fine. You don't have enough pure offensive scoring talent, and then consistent probably talent as well, to say we need to adjust. We need to worry about X or Y. And there's a lot of different factors inside of that, but it's where the Nets are right now. And you said it there about the sloppiness of that game. Teams are willing to do it because there's not a punishment for it. I don't think so far we've seen that from the Nets, where you say, if you do this, it's going to cost you X or Y. And, we're not going to go down this road as far as getting down to the Bulls game, but Cam Thomas, unfortunately, because I think you don't want to put this kind of pressure on a rookie, now he's starting to get thrust into this role of, we need you to ramp it up and be kind of a really consistent scoring threat, because if we don't have you going, we don't have that next option right now.
Yeah, and so and the thing is, like, I think there's a difference of letting someone do something, like letting them get their shot, because I think this is sometimes conflated, right? So, like, we saw in both games where Durant got up his shots, right? And I don't think there wasn't like a Olay kind of defense around Durant. And I will talk about, we're going to talk about Harden in a minute, so I'm going to save the Harden piece. But like with Durant, I think sometimes it was like, oh, hey, you can go out and get yours. We're just going to make sure that, like, we don't think anyone else is going to hurt us. But what you're afforded by being able to do that defensively is, like, if you pay 5 to 10% more attention to a guy like Durant and make each one of those shots 5 to 10% harder, right? Like, it's still going to go in. It's going to be at a cost, right?
Yep.
And like, you're just not going to, and you'll just allow the other guys to miss shots if they want to. And like, because for everyone that's left a little more wide open, it usually means someone else is getting focused on a little bit more. That's just like that's the nature of defense by decent defensive teams, right? Like, it's not like one guy's just left open for a reason. It's like he's left open because I'm going to concentrate a little bit more up the chain here, right? Like, and so everyone gets shaded a little bit more this way. And in a game of inches, like, that stuff really matters. And I think what we're seeing now, and the reason both these games were kind of hard, right? Both from a turnover perspective, both from like a shot selection perspective, is that teams are are just going to continue to go this direction. It's like, we're just not worried about Cam Thomas or Patty Mills, and definitely not about like DeAndre Bembry at all, or we'll moderately worry about LaMarcus Aldridge, with the understanding that his shot is probably going to, like, his percentages are probably going to continue to regress as the season goes on, because he's just not going to keep shooting like 60% or whatever from the mid range, right? So like, if all these things end up continue happening, or you just play this number game out over the long haul, I do think these two games are going to be, there's a chance we look back at these games and say, oh yeah, teams are going to continue to figure this stuff out, about how to defend these guys. And it's just going to keep getting harder with the rest of this personnel. There's just really just a drop off right now, after the top two guys. Everyone's fine, but there's no argument at all that this isn't a huge drop off. So I don't know. I think we're gonna talk about Harden here in a second. Let's talk about something good for 1 second. Let's talk about Prize Picks, baby. You mentioned it at the beginning. of the show. Best DFS prop game on the market right now. More props than any other DFS prop operator. All the superstar players, bench players too. So if you're, kind of a big NBA fan or just even a Nets fan, you can go put a little scratch down on the props for a given game for certain players and dial in on the players as well. They offer a prop, any prop you can think of. It's NFL, yardage, touchdowns, interceptions thrown, everything for NBA too, points, assists, rebounds. You got it. If you go to Prize Picks right now, they're going to match your code up to your deposit, up to $100 at 100%, but you have to use the promo code NBA. Pick 2 to 5 players over under on their projections. You can win up to 10x 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. You're not going against those shark infested waters, salary caps, people putting in hundreds of lineups. Not Prize Picks made it simple. Use the award-winning app. Grab it from both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in under 60 seconds. It's that easy. Prize Picks safe and offers fast withdrawals. Don't hesitate. Check out prizepicks.com. Use the promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
And of course, got to tell you about DirecTV Stream, because I want you to get all of your entertainment in one place. So you're not watching highlights over on your phone or looking at your computer for the game live action. You're begging Doug Norrie for passwords to streaming services that, frankly, he's never going to give it to you. As I said, it's DirecTV Stream, and it brings all those live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports movies and shows all in one place. You get rid of that clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible devices required. Content varies by package. So before we do get over to the Chicago Bulls game as well, and then ultimately onto the Harden piece and what his role is in this potential struggle for the Brooklyn Nets in that Timberwolves game. And this feeds into what you're saying as well. Kevin Durant, 9 of 18 from the field, only attempted 1 3-pointer. Now, as we start to get into the Chicago game, he took 6, knocked down 2 from the outside. But I think there is also that factor here of Kevin Durant maybe is going to need to adjust his game a little bit and where his shot selection comes from, so that, as we know, 3 points is more than 2. Like, you may need to start to lean into more of that in your game. Now, how does that affect the overall style and flow? I don't know, but sometimes it's a little bit of that outside in impact, where if I can do some things from the perimeter, start to spread out the defense, then as I drive, then as I get into the mid-range, things open up a little bit better for some of the players on the outside. But it's...
Well, let me just say something about that real quick. So the other issue with that is what we saw is sort of when it goes back to what we just talked about, is that the overall defensive focus on Kevin Durant is like starting to shift, where he was just seeing a lot more doubles way early, right? Like, this is what happens when you're willing to ignore the other players, is that you can flash doubles at him sooner and with more frequency than they have in the past. And that's going to typically happen more around the perimeter also, which is going to mean it's going to be hard to rise and fire. And it's just going to be hard to do some of those things that he does really well. He is so good that he is still able to work through some of those things and get into the mid-range too. But teams, if you're going to start to see even more sellouts, like defense is selling out to say, hey, it can be anybody but you, or it's all of it's just going to be hard against you. This is why another reason you begin to see some of those numbers. We might see those numbers continue to drop a little bit for him also. So anyway, sorry to cut you off, but like there was, I don't think it's as easy as, hey, make sure, you're just shooting more 3-pointers. It's like they just weren't as available. And it's like he took a ton of shots. And again, he's played a ton of minutes too. So anyway, I think this is something we're going to need to keep an eye on as we go forward, is if teams are just willing to sell out a little bit more against these guys, it's one of those like cliches, but everyone else is going to kind of have to step up. But at some point you don't have the personnel. Like that's just kind of with the situation they're in. And we saw it with Chicago too.
Yeah, and then framing it that way of like saying that Kevin Durant needs to do this other thing in his game. We talk about going back to last year. We've seen it in some games this season. The wear on Kevin Durant of kind of knowing, right? This is on me. When tight games, when it comes down to close games, it's going to be about, am I getting the job done or not? Because you can't necessarily look to anybody else here. Get into the Chicago was frustrating a different way. Now, there's a difference between obviously getting a win on Friday night. It's a loss on Saturday night, but it's not. The two games still offer you bad sample sizes about certain things. And the Saturday night game was frustrating in a different way because it wasn't necessarily It was bad in a different way, a little bit, but I know there's carryover things that you want to get into.
Well, so I know there's a, look, you can say, did they get screwed by the refs? I saw this floated around. I don't necessarily think that to be the case. I think sometimes when you see a free throw discrepancy like we saw in this game, it can be easy to think that. Bull shot 27 free throws, Nets shot 9. That is not the number you want to see, right? They Nets, kind of cured some of the turnover issues. Go ahead.
Quickly, well, like because to your point about when you see that discrepancy, like you can say, well, the Nets are getting screwed by the refs, which sometimes games go that way. But that big of a discrepancy to me, well, again, when you have Kevin Durant, when you have James Harden, that's on you, right? Like you force the issue until you get the calls, until it's blatant and obvious that you're deserving of going to the line. Because it's really hard and somewhat rare that superstar talents on teams, that those teams have that big of a margin between them and the opposition as far as getting to the line.
Look, do I think that the Bulls were beneficiaries of a few more calls that were close? Yes. And I didn't think personally, having watched the game, that it was like some kind of egregious swallowing whistle situation by the refs. Like these guys. And one more thing too, I got to warn people here. You cannot use the histrionics of a player's like complaining to the referee about whether or not they got fouled. Like that's just not a good indicator of like whether or not your team is getting screwed. Because if that was, you would just think your guy got screwed every single time they miss a shot.
So Spencer Dinwiddie from the Brooklyn Nets era, right?
Right. Exactly. It's everybody.
Yeah,
It's actually gotten a little bit better, but it's got a little bit better, but it's also because the game's like actually weirdly more physical just year over year. So anyway, I want to caution people to say, if you see players complaining on every shot, it's just like all of them do that. So whatever. No, but I think that was partly that one, like the Nets just didn't initiate as much like contact there as they could have. Right. I think that the Bulls were a little bit more aggressive on the offensive end. They're a very aggressive defense too. And so one, not forcing a ton of turnovers was a good thing, but they just really weren't going to they just don't commit silly fouls, right? Like they don't commit silly fouls. I saw a pretty good thing by Mike Prada was talking about specifically how James Harden was defended in certain ways that just used to lead to fouls that just aren't anymore. So these are the other things that we're seeing too. And when you're going to get a game where the discrepancy is going to be so huge, you are probably just going to lose most of those games too. And so I just want to caution people to say, like, the refs screwed the Nets out of this. I know that the free throw thing looks crazy, and maybe if it was just a little more even, the Nets win, but I don't think it was some, like, hack job here. I think it just ended up being that, the Nets' physicality on the one end, like, and just maybe a little more sloppiness just led to a few more obvious calls that they just weren't getting on the other end.
We do have a victory lap to get to at the end of this episode. And also, I think there's going to be plenty of meat on this bone as we, before the break, turn our attention to James Harden, because you brought him up there in the way that he was getting defended. The concerns around the state of his game, there's a lot that people have said: the different style, the new look, not having as many of the offensive weapons this year, the conditioning. Where does your needle point to on the James Harden problem meter as far as what's going on with him and why that is obviously creating a lot of the issues that this team's having overall?
Yeah, he was really bad against Chicago. I don't really know another way to put it. It was just a bad game. He had no turnovers, and that's kind of the only thing you can point to that was good. It was right, like 5 for 21 from the field.
Solid.
He's still very reluctant to shoot from the outside at times where it feels completely obvious that he should be shooting. There was one early shot, one shot early in the game where it kind of like summed up the entire James Harden doesn't want to shoot experience. And if you were watching the game, like, you know what I'm talking about, I'm talking to you out there. It's where the ball gets lost in a scrum. He's elbow extended 3-pointer. There's no one even in the frame on him, like to the point where he stood there for a minute. And maybe you want to say he gathered himself and he was just kind of biding his time because it was going to end up being like a practice gym shot. That's how open he was.
Right.
But also, he also kind of stood there for a bit longer than even a practice shot would have been. He made it. So
Right.
Great news. Like it went in. But we've seen this time and time again where his reluctance to catch and shoot sometimes has like cost him possessions. And I don't know if it's like, and it's not his only problem, but that I thought was that like kind of spoke to some of the problems here. And also, I just think there's a conditioning problem. Like he just looks out of shape still. Like the burst isn't there all the time. It's the back-to-back. He's played a ton of minutes. It just look, people have said he plays his way into shape. I think it looks pretty clear. You don't need to like be a physiologist to know that like, he doesn't look in peak shape. And I think that might be rearing its ugly head here too. I don't think it's the only thing, but I just think that there's maybe some reluctance on his end to do some certain things. There's been a reluctance to like get in tip top shape at times. And look, maybe by the end of the year, he's played his way into shape and we're all good. But I think those are part of the problems right now.
Oh, for sure. And I'll be curious. I want to pose a possible solution potentially as far as how the Nets try to address that. Not just James Harden, but specifically, how do you build out around him and get the most value out of all the success that Patty Mills has been having? When you're shooting 5 of 21, Doug, from the field, it makes you wonder, did James Harden get himself a Built Bar before he headed out on the court?
Oh man, around the holidays, baby. This is where you need the Built Bar. It's gonna be easy to reach for those cookies, the cake. I know I'm guilty of this sometimes. It just starts showing up at the house. And when it shows up at the house, you got to eat it. Well, just have the Built Bar show up at the house and you'll just have to eat that. And you'll know that you're grabbing actually something healthy for you with the stats to back it up, not like all those holiday desserts. A slice of pie. Guess how many calories? We went through this before. We probably forget. How many calories do you think are in a slice of pie?
9,000.
You're close, 300. Most Built Bars only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, plenty of protein. They went crazy on the flavors. Raspberry Built Bar, throw that one into your little repertoire. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, 100% covered in real chocolate. Great option for when you're hungry around the holidays. Just grab that Built Bar or two. You won't feel the guilt. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
Oh, and BetOnline has you covered all season long, my friends, with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as the football season continues to move along here, winding down, getting almost down to the final handful of games for the NFL, and of course, setting up those playoff matchups. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head over to the new updated desktop or mobile device, and you can go ahead and get a 50% welcome bonus when you sign up. That's a welcome bonus just for being part of the BetOnline family. 50% welcome bonus when you sign up using promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. I have a few different thoughts as far as how do you navigate it. Now, the first thing is, if James Harden is just out of shape and working himself into form, there's no navigating that specifically from his standpoint. You just have to let him get into shape. And there's no way that it doesn't cost you something, whether it's playing a lot of minutes and just losing steam at the back end of it, or if he is actually trying to be a little bit, methodical around how he uses his energy through the course of the game. I like to think that the game just takes over once you're out there, but there's no denying, right? The guy always looks in better shape at the end of the season than he does at the start of it. But I do think that without having Kyrie on this team, he said it, James Harden, a few games ago about, I'm still trying to figure out when to do what I do, when to be a facilitator, when to be a scorer. I think the Nets need to figure out a way to make him lean into one or the other as his dominant trait with this team. Because you can go back to the Houston days and say, when he was by himself there, he very ball dominant, scorer, downhill. That's the whole mentality all the time, all gas, no breaks, right? But if that's what you need right now for more scoring, then he needs to do that. And then there's going to be a follow-up here about how do you get him to that place? Or you say he had 14 assists, then you have to be that first and worry about your shot second. The question then becomes, do you have enough of the weapons around him that he can lean into that and have it be successful for the team overall? Do you think that is an issue here right now for Harden? Of you have to pick a lane and be mostly that and let the other piece be a byproduct?
No, I think that like the best versions of him that we've gotten so far are the ones where he's able to take advantage of the situation in front of him, right? So where some games that will mean like being a distributor because like the defense is over collapsed, or because like they are using a certain set of personnel that's going to make getting to the rim a little harder, but you're still going to press the issue with them. And then whether that be like through the lob game, because like they overcommitted to him on the drive, so therefore he can lob. They've overcommitted to him, and now you're surrounded by shooters. But you can see that I just gave two things that the Nets don't have. So like they don't have an abundance. They don't really have a rim running big that they can punish on that in that way. And they are down shooters right now without having Joe Harris or like Kyrie or whatever else. So like so the two things that like help really anybody be good, but specifically him, where he doesn't have to choose, oh, I'm only going to be a shooter now, or I'm only going to be a passer. Like he can do the things that are presented to him because they have weapons around him that allow him to make the best choice in the moment. When those weapons are not there, then we see this pressing issue, the pressing a little bit more, right? Like a few more bad shots at the rim, like not being able to finish, like the lob isn't there, so you get more defensive attention. He's not getting the fouls like he's gotten in the past, so that's a problem. Like, so you're seeing that's why I don't want to point it to just one thing with him. Maybe he's a little more out of shape, so now he's a little more gassed at times where he shouldn't be. So I think it's this crazy convergence of things that are happening here where it's hard to pinpoint just one thing. But just to your original question, I do think the best version of him is when he's not thinking about it all, because he's a total genius at basketball. He's a total genius at angles, passing, waiting shots, in terms of waiting passes. Like he does all that stuff perfectly. It just does, some of it does rely on personnel around him a little bit, and they don't have that here. And that we said it before, that might be the part that's making him question his game a little bit too, where all these little things along the margins are not there. And now it can feel like indecision, but it's actually the decisions aren't there in the same way. I hope I'm explaining that correctly.
Yeah, no,
what I think I mean.
Yes, and I think in an odd, maybe in a roundabout way, we agree with one another because you don't have the personnel, you almost James Harden, we've always said, great basketball mind, but without the personnel, he gets caught in this in between of I want to do these things, and then it's not getting rewarded because the guy's not there for the lob. We don't have the players for that, right? So you want to do what the defense is
real
giving
quick,
you.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Personnel plus like maybe being half a step slower than in the past.
Yeah.
Like, so like combining those two, because I don't want to just leave this all on, oh, James Harden doesn't have enough guys around him. He has Kevin Durant on his team. So it can't be all that, right? Like it can't just be the personnel thing. Like, but if you combine that with maybe being a step or a half a step slower than he's been in the past, now you have this dovetailing effect that is what we see. Sorry to cut you off, but I didn't want to just like, I didn't want to like make I kind of want to leave some of that at his doorstep too. Like he needs to be able to have some of this had to have been solved by him, and it's also not being solved by him in like a good workable way.
Yeah, let's be clear. The easy solution is James Harden. You should be you that you've been historically. Right. To your point, right? When the defense gives it to you, take it, finish at the rim, punish them, make all of the looks for everybody else around you that much easier because you are one of the top players in the NBA. And maybe that is, what if we agree that James Harden is a little step slower and it hurts when you're out of shape early in the season. So maybe that half a step that you've lost won't be as big by the time we get to the back end of this year. But right now, it's actually costing you in a few more areas of your game than you're used to. And now that you're in it, there's no other way out of it than to get into shape, right? And to be able to be in form like you're supposed to be. The other piece that I wanted to get to then is, though, we know we're not going to have Joe Harris for a while. At best, it's a month. At worst, it could be 2 months. And then at the extreme worst of it, it's that we never know what the Nets are going to tell us about these type of things, and it could be 6 years. So we won't know when we're going to see Joe Harris back. You have Patty Mills. He's obviously effective. He's not an on-ball guard, though. That hasn't been his style. I mentioned Cam Thomas, and this is not to get into the rookie piece of it. You can name any player you want on the roster or say that it's going to be a hole that needs to get filled in some capacity because of the injuries and the lack of other players they have there. Cam Thomas has on-ball experience. Like I do wonder if the baptism by fire scenario is going to have to lean into having him on the court even more, because he's the only other guy that I can label on this team that you can put the ball in the hands of. And even though there's probably going to be disastrous hiccups along the road for a rookie, he's done it. Like he's been an on-ball creator, and that can at least take some of the weight off of Harden and maybe some of the wear off of Harden over the course of a game, because right now it is a lot of, it's James Harden, if not Kevin Durant. And I just wonder how you balance these minutes right now, because it just feels like as Harden gets into condition, which is great, you'll also have burnt him out getting him to that place. It just, and these are all things. We've said it before. These aren't world is falling things that we're observing here, but they are every few games you get a sample size. And I think that's what you said at the top about these last 2 games. Well, this is now kind of the pattern here. And don't be surprised if more and more teams approach it this way. And I don't know how long the curve is before Harden comes around on it, right?
Yeah, like Look, if you feel like there's just been an overburden of Durant, sorry, I'm getting confused there, of Durant and Harden so far, like then the only way to stop that from happening, one, is to get in fewer close games, or to be more comfortable with guys off the bench. Like there's only a few outs here. Nash said it himself. He's like, yeah, we can play him less and we'll lose more. That was referencing Durant specifically. He's not wrong. It's a good. You don't typically hear admissions like that from coaches. The only way around that is to have certain other guys step up, and that can be a cliche for, hey, just do more, right? But like you're saying specifically, have Cam Thomas do more, because we actually do need the burden to be off these other guys in terms of just shot creation over the short term and probably the long term too. I agree with you. You'll have to take your lumps with it. I think they're just gonna have to at some point say, hey, what's the goal here? Because the minutes are getting nuts. The minutes and usage and load on these two guys specifically is pressing into the crazy town talk where like
what's the threshold where you think the amount of minutes and workload that they have will have the long-term impact? You know what I mean? Is it at 40 games like this that you say,
yeah, I don't know.
It's going to hurt you at some point, right? Because there has to be that spot where you go, it doesn't matter how much you dial it back, the mileage is already on the car, right? Like you're not rolling back the odometer Ferris Bueller style here. Like that's it. You put the mileage on them, you've put the hard workload on them, and then now I think maybe the scenario, and I am curious if this is in the back of the Nets coaching, Steve Nash, in their mind is saying, we keep going, we keep pushing, we keep pushing. We are in first place. We build ourselves up, and then we do take that big step back, knowing that we've put ourselves in a safe spot as far as getting down to the back end of the season and setting yourself up for the playoffs.
I just don't think it's that easy. And I don't think
Yeah.
that there's like a thing in their mind that says, like, oh, when we get to this point, we'll feel better about it, right?
Yep.
Like sometimes you just, I hate to say it this way, and maybe we'll talk about more about this tomorrow, but like sometimes you just get pressed into it because your guys just get hurt, right?
Yep.
Like sometimes injury just makes the decision for you, where it's like, oh, now they're just hurt, so they need to sit out. And and like Giannis played incredibly, like a ton of minutes early in the season, and now he's hurt, right? He has a calf issue, and sometimes like you're just like, oh, they're just hurt now. And maybe you just play it till they get hurt, because if you just work under this assumption that everyone gets hurt at some point, then that's just what solves it for you, kind of. It's like
sometimes Nick Claxton gets 3,005 minutes, and you just can't use the guy.
Or just gets mono and has to sit out for 2 months or whatever. Like it just doesn't. It just
these things happen.
Sometimes or Joe Harris gets hurt. Like it just
yeah.
Like there's no way there's frankly no way that these guys are going to play 82 games. And so then it's just a decision, or you ask yourself, was it because they just chose to sit them down, or is it because one of them got hurt? Right? And I know we got to get out of here, but I did say on Friday night after that game against the Timberwolves, I personally was of the mind that you take the schedule loss on against Chicago and just call the ball and say, we sit them. Like I said that before they lost to the Bulls, right?
And
so
we're gonna get to we'll come back in the next episode. There is a victory lap here for Doug Norrie, but to that point, I 100% would agree with that, and that's where I think there is a secondary benefit to that. Cam Thomas, you're gonna love it, Doug. Day'Ron Sharpe, even Kessler Edwards, though. But scheduled loss. So what does it mean? A scheduled loss means scheduled experience. It means scheduled growth for the rookies. So it doesn't matter. It's not about what can these guys become for you. It's just about take the scheduled loss, give your stars rest, and then let these young guys get some experience. That's great. It's the best of all worlds. If everyone agrees. Does a loss here at the end of November, beginning of December really matter in our big picture? And I'd like to think it shouldn't, right? Unless you have so many questions that you feel like you have to keep going to keep figuring things out.
And I think in retrospect, like the fact that they did lose it only hammers home that point that of like, hey, if we were going to lose this anyway, then it would have been nice to just rest everybody. I'm only saying, but I'm not going to do that, the Monday morning quarterback on that. I'm only saying because I said it before the game. Like I made the point before the game. It said, hey, let's just take your lumps. No one would blame you. You've been working hard. These guys have played more minutes than any other superstar in the league so far. It's okay if they sit. The league would be okay with it too, right? Like you can just sit back to backs at times. Like it is okay when you've been playing crazy minutes. So I wish they had done it. We'll get into more of that tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed over on the YouTube channel. This episode and more is up on the Locked On Nets YouTube. Go jump into the comments too. Love the comments that have been coming in. We're up and over 500, headed towards 600 subscribers. So be part of that group as well. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Nets YouTube. The link will be in the show notes.
Well past the quarterway point of the season, it does beget the phrase, Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Ferris Bueller.
Multiple Ferris Bueller references here. Nice job by you, buddy. Good to have you back. Brought the A game. All right, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.